Good morning. We're learning as a schus for Shleima Filan Chaya Baserach and for Meir Ben Cyril Peril on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph, just a little bit before the Mishnah. Ba Minei Shmuel Miravuna Minayin Lemisasik B'Kachim Shehu Pasal. How do we know if someone, when he does a shechita, it's like four or five lines before the Mishnah? How do we know that someone who is misasik, meaning misasik is that he does something without thought? He's not intentional in what he's doing. That wasn't what he intended to do. Shu pasal, if someone did that by kachim, he shechted an animal for a carbon, and he was misasik. He wasn't intending to do it as a carbon. How do you know that it's possible? That the shechita has to be intending to be a ben bakar, intending to be a carbon. If you look at the last middle-sized line in Rashi, now what does that mean? If someone was busy doing something with a knife, he was picking up a knife, or he's planning to throw the knife, and he happened to, as he was picking up the knife to throw it or to pick it up, it happened to slice the neck of a animal that was a carbon. So that is not going to be a kosher or a carbon. If he intended to shechta, but he wasn't intending the shechita, let's say he thought it was a shechita's chullin, he didn't realize it was a shechita for a carbon, right? He thought he was just shechting the animal stamazai to eat it. It would be kosher shalal b'am shem chayva. We know back from the beginning of Zvachim that a regular carbon, if you shecht it shaloi l'shma, it's kosher v'le'ol b'am shem chayva. So Rashi is saying, if that's what he did over here, if he did it l'shem chulin, that would also be like shaloi l'shma. Taisus doesn't like this. Taisus says, "Minan l'sativ kachshu pasal pirishu kunchim s'asik b'sakim like v'yel l'zer kaisei. The chashav b'chagam v'yel b'chulin pasal. The Rabban nafilu miskavan l'chaticha. Going l'notza b'kaisel k'demach perik beis l'kamon. Achi yichavan l'chaticha semanam." We had this on the previous plot, right? There's a machlokes between Rabbanan and the Chachamim and Reb Nosson. If someone shechts a carbon, not for kachim, just stamazei for chulin, if his intention is not to do a shechita, but just to stick it in the wall, right? If you remember the case, we threw it on the wall and it bounced back, so it cut it both ways. But that was only according to Reb Nosson. The Chacham disagreed. So Tais is saying, why are we saying that misasik b'kachim is possible? It's going to be a non-kosher shechita even by chulin. So Tais v'nira the high misasik b'kachim hind the mischavan l'chaticha simonim v'loy l'shem zvicha. We're talking about where he intended to cut the simanim, but his intention was not to do a shechita. He said, "I'm just having fun. I want to shech I want to cut the animal's neck, but I'm not intending to do a shechita." He thought he was butchering it. Let's say for he didn't know anything about shechita. He thought he was cutting it up for a guy. He was killing it for a guy. He didn't know he was doing shechita. So that's called b'chulin kosher. By chulin, that would be a good shechita. L'kachim pas.
Everybody holds that chulin is kosher.
If a person intended to cut the simanim, even the chachamim would agree that that's going to be kosher. They just say, if you don't intend to do a shechita at all, you don't intend to do the simanim. It means if you're holding the knife and you throw it and it happens to hit the animal's neck, that's not a shechita. But if you're intending to do the action you did, you were intending to cut the animal's knife, but in your mind it had nothing to do with shechita, then that's misasik. So that would be kosher for a shechita's chulin, but possible for a kachim. Because kachim you need, like we see, like the Gemara said, you need das. He says, listen, everyone knows this. This ben habakar, as ben habakar, that has to be with das. The question is, how do you know that even b'di'evet, if he did so, that it's going to be possible? So the answer, it has to be l'tzonchem and has to be l'das, Without das, it's going to pass all the carbon. Zok the Mishnah. Shchitas oivet kechavim nevelo umetama b'matzah. An oivet kechavim that shechts an animal. Now we're going back to regular shchita, not shchitas kachim. A shchita of an animal, he shechted it for a Jew to eat. He wanted to be helpful. The animal is an avela. The shchita is invalid. And metamba b'masa. The din is that an avela is metamba b'masa. If you pick it up, it's going to be a metamba. Gemara will say what this is teaching. First, the Gemara says, nevela in Israel no loy. The Gemara asks, it says shchitas oivet kechavim has a din of nevela. It's treated as nevela. It's mashma. It's only nevela. What's worse than nevela? Avodah zara. If a oivet kechavim shech something for avodah zara, it's not just a nevela that's also to eat and metama, but also is a isra hana on avodas kechavim, meaning on where he's worshiping. He's doing. If he's shechting it for his pagan gods, so then the shechita becomes also hana. The animal becomes also hana. Mantanum. So who is this man, the Amma, who says that there's no problem, even though a guy shechted it, we don't worry that it was shechted for avodah zara. If you remember, right? You know what yayin nesach is? Yayin nesach is going to say anytime a guy touches wine, he has in mind for avodah zara. So Gemara is saying, who's the man, the Amma, who says we don't say the same thing about meat? Maybe whenever they shecht meat, it's also having in mind for avodah zara. This is not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, he says, whenever an oivet kechavim, a non-Jew, does something, he is thinking about avodah zara. So therefore, this would also be not just like the Mishnah says, an avela, but it would even be aser bahana. Rabami amahachik tani. He says, no, that's not what the intention of our mission is, to disagree with this. It's coming to tell you that Shchitas Avodah, he tells you a different thing. He's not necessarily arguing, he's saying another. Shchitas Avodah Kechavim Nevela. The Shchita of an Ovid Kechavim is an Avela, but it's only if it's an Ovid Kechavim, a regular Ovid Kechavim. Hadamin la Avodas Kechavim, Hadamin la Avodas Kechavim. But if it's not just Stam and Ovid Kechavim, but it's a min. A min is somebody, as we're going to see in Rashi, who is it's like a priest. He's deeply involved in avodah zara. This is his purpose in life. So whenever he does it, it's going to be avodas kechavim. It's going to be asa b'hana. You want to see what a min is? If you look on the top line of the next in Rashi on the next Amud, we'll go back in a second. Min. He's someone who's attached to avodas kechavim, to worshiping idols. A min of a yid who's a min. There's such a thing as a yid who's also attached to avodas kechavim. He's worse than a mummer avodas kechavim. Those people who are, we had the phrase mummer. In our mind, all these phrases are all the same, mummer and min, and we think like someone who does anything with avodah zara is avodah kechavim. So we think they all, but there's a lot of different steps. You can have a mummer, is somebody who's avodah zara, but he doesn't mean much by it. He's just doing it because that's what everyone else does. He lives in a town. All the goyim go on Sundays to mass, and he joins the mass. He goes along, but he doesn't. He's not. Then you have a min. A min is somebody who's literally a priest. This is his whole purpose in life. He proselytizes. He goes on Twitter and he says, everyone, all the Jews have to follow Yashka. And I don't know if that's avodah zara, but you get the idea. So that's what Rashi says. Min Yisrael chamor mi mummer. So you can have a mummer who's avodah zara. And we said before, if a person is a mummer avodah kechavim, it's as if he's rejecting the whole Torah, but it's still not the same thing as a min. A min, everything he does, he's attached to it, and that's all he thinks about. So anything he does is always going to reflect that. So we're saying, our Mishnah said, Shchitas oivet kechavim is nevela, Only the shechita of a regular avodah kechavim isn't available, but the min is avodah kechavim. We're going to have to choose avodah kechavim, and therefore it's going to be also bahana. Tnina lahadutanu rabban. This Mishnah is saying the same. This Bryce is saying the same thing as we saw, as what the Chum said. Shchitas min la'avodas kechavim. The shchita of a min is treated as it's going for avodas kechavim. It's going to be also bahana. Pisai, his pas, if he bakes pas, it's pas kusi. It's going to have the same status as bread baked by a kusi. Rashi explains that the Chum geyser specifically on the pas of a kusi that's worse than pas of a guy. They were very worried about people eating their pas, and they were not careful, the kusim. So therefore they were geyser, and it's not because of takroib. We have a din of pas akum, that we don't eat pas from a guy. But that there are exceptions, right? You're allowed to eat Stelladora cookies. You're allowed to eat something that was baked by a guy if it's by a Geisha baker. As I say, if there's not anything else available. But there are heterim. A pas kusi, there's no heter for. There's no exceptions, and you never let it. That's what it says. Someone who's a min for avodah zara, his pas, we're worried that his pas was made for avodah zara. It's aser and gansen. Yenoi yayin nesach. His wine is going to have the din of yayin nesach. Right? A mummer for avodah kechavim is not the same thing as a min. We don't say his yayin nesach. This is going for both a yid and a guy. A min could be a yid or a guy. Svar of Sifrei Kusmin, the svarim that they write, it's interesting. Rashi says, we're not talking about that they're sifvarim of apicursus. We're talking about a min, someone who worships avodah zara, who wrote a sefer Torah. That sefer Torah has to be burnt. It's also to use, because it's called Sifrei Kusman. He has a mind for witchcraft. He has a mind for the avodah zara when he writes it. So it's a pasala. It's not just a pasala to Sefer Torah, but it's condemned. It has to be burnt. Right? Rashi says Sifrei Kusman nevia abal l'shem aviskeichav kasav achanam emiskin shekasam min gisrei. It must be burnt. Peiros of Tavlin, his peiros. It's not demai like an amaretz. We don't know if he took trumas and meisus, but it's considered to be tevel because there's no way. It's not even a suffix. He certainly didn't take off trumas and meisus. And some people say even a yid who's a min, his children are mamzerim. Rashi says, sounds crazy, but you look around the world and there are people that think this way. They don't believe in marriage. They don't believe in monogamy. So you have to assume if they're a Jew that their wives will born another. He's not necessarily the father, even though he's married to her. And the children of Mamzer. The Tanakama says even if he's a min, as crazy as he is with all his shittas, he's still going to have. He's not going to allow his wife to be mizana with other people to make the children Mamzer. We said the shechita of an oived kechavim is an avela of an echashem minhu. Why aren't we worried? You're saying oived kechavim is different. It's not as bad as a min. Oived kechavim who is a priest. Why aren't we worried that this Oived kechavim is it doesn't have to be a formal priest. It could be in his mind. He's a devotee. He's fully obsessive about his avodah zara. Rav Nachman says b'shem Rabbi Avua, no, there's no minim by the Oived kechavim. That doesn't make any sense. But we know that there are. Why are you saying that there aren't any? Ema, so you have to change it. Ein roiv Oived kechavim mina. He says you can't assume. You don't assume just because there are some that are like that. Most Oived kechavim are just doing their thing. They're not thinking about whether Oived kechavim is true or not. They don't obsess about it. There is a minority who does, but you don't have to assume every Oived kechavim is a min. Sagt Mar Savala ki Adam Rav Chia bar Abba Rav Yechna. Nachram shebechutz oretz lav Oived kechavim elamin negavi sayim biyadei. Rav Chia bar Abba says Shem Rav Yechna that Nachram outside of Eretz Yisrael are not even Oived kechavim at all. They're just doing it out of habit. They're doing it because that's what their parents did, so they do the same thing. They don't really believe at all. So Rashi says, so what is it? What does that mean? It's more like from the fact, since in Chutz La'aretz, we say the Avdei Kechavim they're not really from Avdei Avodah Zarah. They're just doing it out of habit. They don't really believe it. So even though in Eretz Yisrael, they're one step above that. They are more sincere about the Avodah Zarah, but it doesn't reach the level of that most of them are minim. Generally, they're minig avesei biyadei. Amar Rav Yosef bar ben Yumi, Amar Rav Nachman, ein minim b'umas avdei kechavim. So this is a very similar statement to what we said before, but this is from an Amoira. So, and he's not saying it. He's not saying it to explain a brisa. So therefore, he really means it literally. Ein minim b'umas avdei kechavim. But we're going to have to explain it. In what sense do we say there's no minim b'umas avdei kechavim? It's not meaning like we just said that most of them are not avdei kechavim. Lamai. So what is he saying it for? If it's saying that legabe shchita, that they're not considered minim, and it's just when they shecht, it's just going to be puzzle. It's not going to be considered avodah zarah. That it's asabana hasha shchitas min Yisrael amet asira avdei kechavim mibayit. We said the min of a Yisrael, shchitas min of Yisrael. We said is only asur. We've said from the Mishnah and the Brisa that it's only asur, but it's not going to be asur b'hana. Certainly, that of Ovid Kechavim is going to be asur as well. Elamai reading. Elamai, it must be saying that there's no min by a min b'umas Ovid Kechavim. It's coming to tell you that even though there's a din that my reading that we push a yid down into a pit, he should disappear and never be heard from again. If you have an opportunity to do so without being thrown in jail, you're supposed to throw a Jew who is a real min. He's really obsessed with avodah zarah. You're supposed to throw him down the well, never to be heard from again. So it's saying that, but that doesn't apply for a guy. So you have to do it by a yid. Certainly, you have to do it by a guy who's a min. This is probably one of those gemaras that maybe it's better not to put it on YouTube. Amr of Ukva Bachama. You think that people who have algorithms that go through YouTube videos and say this shouldn't be on YouTube, and then they find it like that? Amr Rav Ukva Bachama, the Kabbal mehen carbon. It means to be makabel a carbon from them. If they bring a carbon, that they're not going to be considered a min. The Tanya michem v'loy kochem l'hoitzias hamuma. Michem, we say that you can't take a carbon from a yid who's a mumma. Michem bachem chalakti v'loy b'leib michav. We say, but this din that you can't take a carbon from a mummer only applies to a yid. But from a guy, we have no expectation that a guy is going to follow all the mitzvahs, even though he's even though he doesn't observe the Torah. You could still accept his carbon. It doesn't pass it. So why are we saying that even though by a yid there's a distinction that we do take from a regular yid, but we don't take from a mummer? We're saying by Avid Kechavim we even take from a mummer. Let's say the other way around. By Yid we take from a tzaddik. We don't take from a rasha, but by a guy we don't take at all. That would seem to be the more sensible thing to say if we're saying that there's a difference between a Yid and a guy. So when Allah like that, the Tanya ish matam ish ish l'rabis ha'avdei Kechavim shenoim davim davis Yisrael. We have a pasuk that tells you specifically that Avid Kechavim can be menadav, that can donate a carbon to be sent, to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. So once we know that's true, we can't say that the klal loy, that there's no such thing that every chavim bringing a carbon, sending a carbon. So we said at the end of the Mishnah, we said that Ovid Kechav Mushatz, his carbon is not his carbon, his shchita. We're talking about regular shchita to eat. The shchita makes it into nevela, and it's metama b'masa. It makes it tame if you pick it up. an avela, if you pick it up, if you carry it, it's metama. Talking about pshita, even the avela he metama b'masa. What does the Mishnah have to tell you for? We already said it's an avela, and the din is that an avela is metama by carrying. So what do you have to say metama b'masa? Amar v'hachitani zu metamas b'masa. This is metama b'masa. V'yesh lacher she'itameya afilu ba'oil. But there is another case where it's going to be not just metama as an avela, but it's going to be metama like a mace. That's going to be metama in oil. Ve'ezu zu takravis avayis kechavim. This is if it's brought not by stama avoid kechavim to be eaten, but avoid kechavim intended it to be avodah zara. So then it becomes an object of avodah zara. Or Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, like we're going to see, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira learns from a pasuk that takrayvus avoid kechavim has a din of tumas mace that it's metama ba'oil, even more than an avail. There's another, and it's coming to tell you that it's metama b'masa, and that's the limit of it. And even if it would be a case of a takrayvus avot kechavim, it's still not metama ba'oil. It's still going to only be metama b'nevel. Be'ezazu takrayvus avot kechavim. U'duloi Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. According to this, our mission is not like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Tanya, and what's this Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, where do we know that an object of avodah zara is metama ba'oil? It's not just like an avela, which is only metama b'mago b'masa. They attach themselves to Baal Pa'ar, which was an avodah zara. And they ate the sacrifices of the dead. What is it called? Sacrifice of the dead. Because Meseir says, since we call it zivchei mesim, that it's going to have tuma like a mace, the object of avodah zarah that was used as a sacrifice is going to have the din of tumas mace to be metama b'ayil. Zok the mission. Hashoichet belayla b'chein hasuma sheshachat shitashik shera. If someone shechs in the darkness, or someone who's blind who shechs, their shchita is kshera. It says someone who did this. It says hashoichet, if someone did it, the evid in lechatchila loy. It's mashma only be the evid, but lechatchila it's better to be able to see what you're doing, or either not to do it in the darkness, or to have someone who's not blind do it. One could check by day or by night. You do it on the top of a roof or on the top of a ship. And Rashi explains this is talking about because there's an isser to pour out onto a into a cup of to pour the dam of a shchita into a kli, because it's going to look like avodah zarah. Let's see, Rashi you can't shecht with the blood going into the sea or into the rivers. You can't do it because people will think that you're being over the yam, or you're being over the river. The loyal to kalim, and you can't do it into again. The loyal mekabel sadam l'zarkel of his problem, doing for his problem. I feel but on top of a roof, it's not a problem. Even though you're catching it on a clear, you're doing it over the side of the roof. You're not worried that he's going to say he's doing it for the shemayim, or if he's mekabel in a kli. Everyone knows he doesn't want you just doing. He's just catching it or doing it over the side because he doesn't want to get his roof dirty. Same thing. He's doing it over the side of the ocean, over the side of the ship. It's not because he's worshipping the ocean. He just doesn't want to get his ship dirty. But anyway, that's not really our point. We said so we're saying even by night you could shecht at night, even though you can't see. No, that when we say lechatchila you could do it at night is where there's a light in front of you. Then you could do it at night. There's no problem. But lechatchila, someone who's blind, or if the light's turned off, you should not do at night. It's still going to be kosher. Over there it says like Bein b'yom u'bein b'layla. By day, you could see. By night, also, so you could see. Over here, we said where it's b'di'evet, it's talking about the sumo as well, a sumo or at night. So the night is similar to the sumo; they can't see at all. Zok the Mishnah. This is a bit complicated, but very good things to know. Hashoichet b'Shabbos u'b'yom HaKippurim. Someone shecht on Shabbos and Yom Kippur, he's chayiv for a malacha. You're not allowed to do so. You're not allowed to shecht on Shabbos. Afal pisha mechayev b'nafshay. If he does it b'mezid, he's mechayev misa for doing so. Shchitos ekshera. It's still a kosher shchita. I'm sorry.
Let's say Shabbos, I think we benefit from.
Oh, we're going to get to that in a second. The Gemara is going to say you can't use it on Shabbos. It's going to be a few problems. We're going to try to figure out what the problem is. Could be muksa also. Also, how could you benefit? We'll get to that. I was wondering if you're going to ask Taisus this question. If you remember, we said before, Machal Shabbos b'far Hesya, his shchita is possible. Tema ibn Mezid, right? We said he's Mechaya benafshay. Tema ibn Mezid hayet shchitas ekshera. Omum lechal Shabbosos. Also lechal mishchitas the muchach lael. We said you can't eat from the shchita of someone who's a mumma lechal Shabbos. By the way, boy lokum Mezid. Remei Islam perek ad kama perek zeh boyer. The mumma ladavar echad have a mumma lechal terakula. Forgetting about Shabbos, and he's a mumma ladavar echad. He's a mumma lechal terakula, and you can't trust shchita. We said Mechal Shabbos b'Hesya earlier. We didn't say it as someone who's Mechal Shabbos. Even if he's Mechal Shabbos b'Mezid, he's still not. You don't pass the sheep. Miyumai the Mukha Germeya Kasha. Okay, well, that's Zak the Gemara. Amar Huna Darish Chia Barab Mishmei Derab Asura ba'Achila Yuma. It's true. We said that a Sheicha b'Shabbos Kippur, even though he's mechayv benafshi, it's kosher, but you can't eat it that day. You can't eat it on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, obviously, you can't eat it because you're not allowed to eat anything. But it's also b'achila for the day. The Chaverim said the reason why you can't eat it on that day is because the shita of Reb Yehuda. We still need to understand. Hi, Reb Yehuda. What shita of Reb Yehuda is this that was saying that you can't eat it on that day? So, if you remember back when we learned Shabbos 5.5 years ago or so, there's a constant machlokes between Rav Shimon and Rav Yehuda. Rav Shimon holds Davar She'em Eskaven. It's mutter. Rav Yehuda says it's also. And we see there's also machlokes between the Megabi Muksa. They have a machlokes of Megabi Muksa. Rav Shimon is Mekel and Yehuda is Machmer. So that's what we're going to try to say is a sheet of Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda da'achanahi. It's Rabbi Yehuda of Achana who says that anything you're not prepared to use at the beginning of Shabbos, you're not allowed to use it. It's muksa to use on Shabbos. It's not. You can take a gourd that was cut off from the ground before Shabbos, and you could cut it in front of the behemoth. It's not considered too much work, even though you could have done it before Shabbos. You're allowed to do it on Shabbos. Different din. It's not really relevant. If you have an animal that died, whether it died before Shabbos or it died on Shabbos, you're allowed to cut it up and feed it to the dogs. Nevela is not, you can't eat it, but the dog could eat it. Yehuda says no. If this animal died, if your cow died on Shabbos, you can't feed it on Shabbos to the dogs. It's going to be also because at the beginning of Shabbos, it was a live animal. It wasn't prepared to be eaten by the dogs. So therefore, it's also alma. Since it wasn't prepared before, and it's also hachanami. Let's say over here also something that was shechted on Shabbos before Shabbos, you couldn't eat it because it didn't yet have shechita. So at the beginning of Shabbos, it wasn't prepared. So therefore, it's also even if it gets prepared on Shabbos because it's muksa. Amalei Abaye. Abaye says, "Mi dami hasan mi kara muchal adam hashna muchal leklavim." By the Nevela, Rabbi Yehuda said it's asur because before Shabbos, it was a cow that if you shechted, a person would eat it. So at the beginning of Shabbos, it was prepared. It was something that was intended to be eaten by human beings. and now it died, so it lost. You changed it, so it was totally not prepared to be for an animal. First of all, it wasn't dead, and second of all, even if it would have been dead, if you would have shechted it, you wouldn't have fed it to the dogs. You would have eaten it yourself. So it was entirely unprepared to be used for clubbing. Over here, even though it was missing the shechita, but it was prepared for people. So just the status of a change that it didn't have a shechita, that's not considered that it wasn't muchah. The fact because it was intended to be eaten by people, and now it was shechted on Shabbos, so Rabbi Yehuda should agree that it could be eaten.
How could you eat it? You have to cook it first. It's another.
You eat a raw tartar. I think Rashi even says that.
Yeah. Some interesting things back in the days.
Maybe Taisa says that. Yeah, but it's right it's obviously it's without cooking. There will be another problem. Cooking, obviously, not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So tomorrow, mi savris behem b'chayel achila imedis. The Gemara says, no. How could you say this? Behema, while it's alive, you're not. You want to say you want to be mechalak that the behema is mucham. That over there, the behema, Rabbi Yehuda said it's not mucham because it's oimid for an adam, and now it's being eaten by a kaleb. The Gemara says it's not mucham for an adam at all. A behema, as long as it's alive, it's not intended to be eaten by either by a dog or by a person. Behema chayel gadol medis. Normally, a behema is going to be used to breed. You're going to keep it to grow other little behemoths, or you're going to use it for plowing, for work. So why are you assuming it's intended for eating? So if that's the case, if a behemoth is not intended to eat at all, how could you shecht an animal on Yom Tov? We know that you're allowed to shecht on Yom Tov. You're allowed to prepare an animal to eat. You're allowed to shecht it and eat it on Yom Tov. How could that be? If you say that animals are prior to before Shabbos or Yom Tov, your intention is to keep them. Generally, the intention is to keep them, and when you decide to eat them, to shech them and eat them, that's changing their status. Then how could you bring on Yom Tov? It wasn't muchan on Erev Yom Tov.
Because so
we're talking about stam. We're talking about stam. How could you stam as they just take an animal? I guess they didn't set aside the animals. They used to just go out to their flock and on Yom Tov and pick out a sheep and shech. That wasn't the case that they designated them beforehand. Amaloi, it's true. Both of these. It's not that it's only Imedis Lagad. Both things are true. There's two options. It could be lachila and it could be legadol. Nishkata, but when he shets it, hovra de lachila Imedis. After he shets it, then we say breira. We say that retroactively we're going to go back and we're going to say that from before Shabbos it was intended to be lachila. Loy nishkata, if he does check over the legadol Imedis. So we use brayrit. That's the reason why it's true that generally it is going to be enough nafkamina between on Yom Tov it's going to be mutter because then it's hover lemafreya that it was legadol, but we're going to be able to be mechalik between whether it was something, whether if you shech then it was meant to be lachila. If it dies by an animal, then it was never intended lachila. You can't say it was hover lemafreya. It just died. Practically more of a lesser Rabbi Yehuda Breira, but we know Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of the svara of Breira that you can retroactively go back and designate what the status of something was based on what happens later. Minolan. Where do we know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of Breira? You know what? Let's stop here. We'll do Breira tomorrow. I think that's not the thing to end with because it goes on a little bit. Okay. Shkayach.